Aloha and welcome to another episode of Hawaii Farmer Series. I'm your co-host Matthew Johnson, here with Justine Espiritu.
Hello.
And this is actually a special occasion because it's actually 2 shows in one day, a first for us. So hopefully you're enjoying all the great topics that we're talking about. So Hawaii Farmer Series is bringing Hawaii's farmers and ag supporters together to hear about their backstories and what they're doing to make Hawaii a more food secure island. So today we have a special guest, not necessarily from Hawaii, but coming from Puerto Rico.
Yeah, so today we have Paul and Isabella. And for a little bit of background, Paul is from here. He was living in Hawaii on the Big Island and then at University of Hawaii, and recently went to Puerto Rico for his PhD work. So he'll talk a little bit about that work. But what I was really excited about, more excited than Paul, I was really excited about Isabel and the work that you're doing in Puerto Rico through kind of a USDA program, which we'll get into the details of that. But talking, we kind of realized Puerto Rico and Hawaii have a lot in common as island communities, and particularly about their food security. I kind of became interested in food and agriculture in Hawaii when I learned that Hawaii was importing about 85 or 90% of our food, and so I was really intrigued when you said Puerto Rico was similar. So I thought it'd be great to bring you guys on to kind of talk about the work that you guys have done in agriculture. You're working on a specific project, and then Paul, being a resident of both Hawaii and Puerto Rico, can kind of help us in that in that conversation, because we've been getting a little more in depth of what's going on here in Hawaii, and so it's always just great to see what's going on in similar places. So thank you guys so much for joining us and taking some time on your vacation to talk some work.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah. So let's start with Paul. You can kind of talk about what your field of work is or what you're kind of doing, and we'll move on to Isabel.
Yeah, so I'm a graduate student at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras, which is in San Juan, which is the equivalent to Honolulu, but in the island of Puerto Rico. And so as I mentioned, I'm a graduate student in environmental sciences, and I'm focusing on like plantation agriculture in the tropics. And let me flip it with a question. What did you guys have for lunch today?
Oh God, I had coffee, I think.
Okay, that doesn't help. What did you have?
I actually had a salad and a sandwich.
Salad and a sandwich. Well, if you had salad dressing on the salad, there's a high probability it contained this magic ingredient called palm oil, which is it's an oil seed. It's an oil crop like soybean oil, like canola oil, but it's so much more efficient per unit area that this crop has just taken off in the tropics, and in some places like Southeast Asia, where the epicenter of the production is, it's causing massive deforestation. So I'm studying the social and environmental impacts of the expansion of this crop, but in a different region in Central and South America. So as it relates to the show, it's not necessarily, it's kind of the other end of the spectrum, right? You guys, I think, focus more on the show about local food production, and this is kind of the other reality, which is that a lot of food comes from large commercial estates that's export oriented. So yeah, and I'm doing my field work. I'm going to start my field work in Colombia this year, 2016, and I'm still kind of getting all that set up and kind of emerging from the first phase of the program to now begin my research. So it's going to start getting exciting. Yeah.
But then even outside of your academic work in Puerto Rico, having lived here and there with this issue of food security kind of becoming an issue, even if that's not the focus of your work, do you see that in the community being focused on, whereas maybe you're immersed in that specific issue at work, but
in terms of in terms of which community?
Well, in Puerto Rico, or
in particular?
yeah, what's it? Sorry, San Jose.
A San
San
Juan.
San Juan,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
But so for example, the guests we just had on, they put on a food summit every year, which kind of brings together stakeholders, restaurants, farmers, as well as just residents. So do you guys have that same kind of thing? Or I'm curious to know of what kind of things are going on
Yeah, so, you know.
that maybe
the-
just you as a resident are aware of.
Yeah, so the situation there is very similar to here. You know, traditionally has been that almost all the food is imported. And I think recently, I've only been living on the island for 3.5 years now, but from what people have told me and what I've sort of observed, that there is this more and more of this sort of notion of you know, like local food production, and you're seeing more markets emerge. You know, more like fresh, you know, fresh produce. And Isabel could probably tell you a lot more about specifically what's going on because she's lived there her whole life. But you are starting to get the opportunity to buy, you know, things outside the supermarket that you can, you know, trace where they were produced, and you have more confidence in what you're buying there. In that sense.
Well, for example, like when we were at the grocery store, what did you say about that? You know, of what's kind of accessible
Yeah,
there.
so I was pretty shocked I was impressed with you know, the supermarkets here, because in Puerto Rico, it's you know, like the produce that we get there it just looks almost fake, almost like artificial. I imagine it's like the produce that nobody wants from the mainland, or I'm not sure how it's really produced, but you know, it's the flavor. There's not a lot of flavor in the food, and it's really hard to find, you know, like nutritious, good food there, fresh food. You know, it's a lot of canned goods and whatnot. So, you know, I imagine it's hard to, you know, to live a nutritious lifestyle when those are your options. And when I came here to the supermarket here, I was impressed that, you know, there's this entire local food you know, section now, which we don't even have in the supermarkets there. So in that sense, I'd say the local food production scene here is a little more advanced. At least it's moving a little faster.
So that's the kind of
perhaps.
things I'm kind of interested to see. You know, I think we kind of take for granted that we do have these sections now in the grocery store that are local. So it's interesting to see if that same push isn't happening, you know, from the grocery store side in Puerto Rico and stuff. It's just kind
I
of
would say that it's happening now. It's actually, there's a big momentum now, and local farmers, young people specifically, are starting to grow food because we have like this food scarcity for so long. Food is very expensive at the supermarket. It's not fresh, as Paul said. So we have this kind of food scarcity, right? And food security is a big issue now. Even the government is kind of pushing the idea of getting people out there to farm, to grow our own food. So I think we're starting to see more local products at the supermarket, but there's a lot of demand and not enough supply. So that's another part of the story.
yeah.
So that's one thing I was going to ask about the demand, because I mean, I think that's kind of how it typically starts, especially with, you know, we always tell people, if you want to see more local products, you got to go to the supermarket and you have to demand for it. And then the same thing with the restaurants. So you're starting to see more of the demand and people going to the restaurants and the stores looking for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially over the last few years, we have seen new farmers market grow around the island. 3 years ago, we only had maybe 1 or 2 on
whole island?
Saturdays. Yes.
Oh, wow.
And now we're having like 4, 6 all over the island. Even every week, you have at least 2 options where to go and get fresh products from local farmers. You get to meet the farmer, and the prices are good. Most of them is organic
Wow.
produce as well. So that's another very important part of the whole dynamic, that we're seeing the growth of organic farming, and that's super positive. And of course, it's necessary for the nutritious part, because as Paul said, in the supermarket, it's very expensive food. They travel more than 2,000 miles to get to Puerto Rico. So imagine the quality of the products that we get. And so yes, I'm seeing people are demanding fresh products, and at the restaurants, the chefs are proud of serving local products, and that's also motivating people to get into like farming businesses that there's not so many. I think that's one of the issues that we need to tackle now, is how to get people motivated into like having agriculture businesses and being ag entrepreneurs so we can
Yeah.
get more of the products.
How, now, one of the things I know is an issue here is the price difference between what's grown locally versus what's coming from the mainland or different parts of the world. How does it compare in Puerto Rico to the lower quality product that's coming from 2,000 miles away versus what's grown locally?
It's very impressive, but sometimes the imported products are cheaper than the products produced locally. And that's because of the pricing regulations and a lot of different laws that make imported goods cheaper.
Yeah, it's kind of for us here. It's like the scale of like
Correct.
small
Correct. I think it's
farmers
the same
versus-
dynamic. So people, even though they want to support local agriculture, we have a very bad economic crisis going on, as you may have heard in the news. So people really don't have enough money to invest in food. And we spend a lot of money in food. And it's mostly because of those pricing regulations.
Before we go too far, Isabel, can you give us a little background on yourself as well? Like, give us your history.
Well, it's not that long history, but
It does make it sound like it's like
young.
hundreds of years old.
Well, I'm an environmental scientist and geographer from Puerto Rico. I studied there as well. And I've been working with research having to do with ecology, landscape, ecology, land use change, demography. But now I'm working in a project related to climate change and agriculture. It's called the Caribbean Climate Hub, and I'm working as a coordinator of the hub, trying to develop outreach projects to help farmers, forest managers to adapt to climate change. So that's new for me. I've only been there for over a year now, and it's the first time I work with farmers, and I'm just learning a lot about this topic, and I'm super excited to be part of an agent of change, trying to help the industry grow in a sustainable way. So that's more or less.
Just a little bit of the history.
Yeah, just a little.
But that's cool. I mean, I'm interested to hear of, I mean, kind of the project you're working on. I haven't really heard of that here in Hawaii. If you can kind of explain, so you guys are kind of collecting case studies and of or not necessarily mitigation, but just sustainable practices.
Correct.
And mitigation. Maybe those are kind of two separate things of just
Yeah.
sustainable practices and also specifically trying to mitigate effects of climate change.
Yes.
And you're interviewing them and then putting together videos or trying to put together resources that you can share with other farmers too.
Correct. This project is part of a national initiative called the Regional Climate Hubs. So there's like 10 climate hubs all over the nation. And this one in the Caribbean includes Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So we have been affected by severe drought, by hurricanes, by pests, floodings, and we've lost many of our crops. And farmers are in need of information, of techniques, of strategies to use to adapt to these changes. Like how can they become more resilient to these changes in weather and climate patterns? So at the Hub, we are kind of doing research about what options do farmers have to become more resilient in terms of adaptation practices. It's also mitigation in the sense that sustainable land management practices helps farmers to be more responsible with the use of land resources, with soil and water. So mitigation and adaptation is a big part of what we do. So at the moment, we are developing this project called Adapte. And Adapte is basically an outreach project where we identify farmers that are implementing these sustainable management practices today in their lands, and they kind of serve as example to other farmers of what can they do, what specific technique they're using to retain more water in the soil, to manage this specific kind of pest. So they're kind of sharing their experiences with other farmers through videos. And we are also gathering information through fact sheets and doing workshops and kind of educating about climate change in general.
And this program is connected in with the USDA, is that correct?
Correct. The Climate Hubs is part of the USDA initiative. It's one of the efforts to kind of provide technical support to farmers and forest managers to give them the tools, the necessary tools and information to become less vulnerable to climate variability and climate change.
Was this something that you guys had to apply for to get? Like, were only so many cities awarded
Correct.
that?
Yes, this is a national effort, and different USDA agencies like the Forest Service or the Agricultural Research Stations, they kind of submitted a proposal and competed to be kind of the headquarter for one of the hubs, and we were selected to be part of the Caribbean Climate Hub.
That's cool. That's awesome. I kind of want to break that down a little more of just, the different stakeholders that kind of came together to, even secure this and then how it's being executed. We're just going to take a quick 1-minute break and then we'll come right back. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jay Fidel. I'm host of Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, which is our flagship show, which plays 4 to 5 p.m. every Wednesday. And the supporters of that show are Hawaii Energy Policy Forum and Hawaii Energy. And luckily enough, we have representatives of both of them right here today to tell you more about what they think about the show. Sharon Moriwaki at my left is co-chair of Hawaii Energy Policy Forum, and she goes first. Sharon?
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. I'm so glad that we have this Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy. This was 2 years ago when we started this, and we have continued it because it's so important, and there's so many developments happening across the state, and we hope you'll tune in every Wednesday, 4 to 5. It's wonderful.
And Ray is Hawaii Energy. Ray, what is your thought about the same subject?
Well, I agree completely with Sharon that we are talking about every Wednesday, 4 to 5. We talk about some of the most important subjects that are affecting the islands now and into the future. Energy, clean energy, we need it. We often run into new ideas that we had not thought about before. We did just today, and I think we're going to have more of that in the future. So come on down and watch us 4 to 5 on Wednesdays, and we'll see what happens.
We'll see you then. Aloha.
Aloha.
Yeah, I think Puerto Rico's
Aloha and welcome back to the double header of Hawaii Farmer Series. I'm your co-host, Justine Spiritu, my lovely loyal sidekick, Matthew Johnson. Today we have some special guests from Puerto Rico. We have Isabel and Paul. Thank you guys for joining us. Paul is a student at the university in Puerto Rico and was sometimes resident of Hawaii. And Isabel has been a Puerto Rico resident forever and is working on a really cool project that we are getting some background on. And so we're just kind of spending this episode getting to hear about this cool project, as well as just comparing the situation of Puerto Rico and Hawaii. They both share the reality that about 85 to 90% of their food is imported. And so kind of seeing the different ways that's explored and focused on over there. So to give it a little more context, can you just kind of compare the size and maybe any of the demographics of the size and scope of Puerto Rico to Hawaii?
Well, I believe that Puerto Rico is like 10,000 kilometers squared, so that would make it relative. The Big Island, I'm not sure how big the Big Island is, but I believe it's a little smaller than the Big Island. So it's not a very big island, and if you combine all the Hawaiian Islands, you have much more land area to to plant. So, but they do. It's interesting because the two islands, or the series of islands in Hawaii and Puerto Rico, have similar histories in terms of like plantation agriculture, cane, sugar mainly, and then from there they kind of took, I guess, sort of different trajectories. And in the case of Puerto Rico, once cane sugar ended back in about the sort of the 40s or 50s, it was replaced with just industry, and primarily like the pharmaceutical industry. So there was basically all the people who once worked the land all moved to the cities. There's this this big, migration to the urban areas, and the island, which was once almost completely deforested for agriculture, was now allowed to regrow, and now you have secondary forests all over the island.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which are now, close to 100 years old now, or getting up there. So, because the land was abandoned, there's very little agricultural, productivity now. And in Hawaii, it's somewhat similar, correct? I'm not sure how long the pineapple and
well, then it's interesting.
cane-
I don't know if it's the same for Puerto Rico, but because here it was pineapple
Pineapple and sugar.
and there was a lot of kind of pesticide use, or
Mm-hmm.
the practices from that plantation style were kind of
Yeah.
detrimental. So there's kind of a lot of land that we can't maybe grow organic crops in. Is that kind of the same situation for the land that was abandoned over in your island?
Do you know? I don't
I
know if the pesticide use. I'm not familiar.
I wouldn't say that's a big problem over there, because the parcels, Puerto Rico was divided into small parcels. So we have a very heterogeneous landscape. So when people move from the country to the cities and abandon their farms or their rural houses, everything is starting to grow again.
Grow
So
back.
yeah, you have these abandoned farms all over the island that are now forests, or they just stay as pasture lands, or others were converted to urban uses. But the main issue now is that there's a lot of land that is just
Not
Follow.
productive.
not productive. And people hold those titles to the land, or maybe the government has a lot of land as well available, but somehow it's very difficult for farmers to get accessible land, in terms of economically accessible land to grow their food, or they have to go through this very long process of asking for the government to lease, to get permission to lease those lands. So it's like a very steep process for farmers
Yeah.
to get land.
What?
And then even if they can get onto that land, then sounds like if it's been followed for however many decades, then you're going to have that cost of clearing the land
Correct.
and getting it back to growing capacity, irrigation, all this
Correct.
additional infrastructure that's no longer there. And it's interesting because like here in Hawaii, we've had some of that similar transition, but a big issue has been not so much that the land is just, some of the lands are just sitting there, but there's a lot of development pressures on that
Yes.
land. And I imagine there's probably some of the same pressures in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I would say that back in the 90s, where we have still population growth, that was a big issue. Specifically, the suburban areas around the main cities were mostly rural lands that are converted to suburban land uses, and very suburban sprawl mostly. So
Yeah.
it's land use planning is not our strong side. So there's
Non-existent,
it's just sprawl everywhere. So you have a lot of fragmentation too, and it's difficult to have like big farms. And the other thing that's actually affecting us is the loss of population. We've been losing more than 10,000 people every month for the last 2 years. And for the last 10 years, we've lost almost 1 million people. So now we have
Is this from emigration?
from
or?
emigration to the United States because of the difficult economic situation. We've been in an economic recession since 2006. So also we don't have workers to work the land, to farm the land. So that's also another side of another issue, because people don't want to work the land.
Yeah.
That's another problem.
I think we have that issue too. I think for a long time people were arguing we need more, we want these landowners or the state to give more land. Like, well,
Where are the farmers?
Farmers,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think there's been a lot of collaboration with our landowners, with the state and our universities. We have kind of focused on trying to develop these farmer programs.
Right.
For example, Go Farm, which we've talked a lot about on this show, this kind of collaboration where these enthusiasts to kind of, either just local food, self-sufficient kind of enthusiasts, as well as, folks that are just out of work, to give them training on the technical side of farming, as well as the business support. And giving them that experience, and then in that case, land becomes more accessible. If they build this track record and build this business, then they can have, get a lease on this land. Is there any similar in terms of like that kind of farm training to? I mean, I feel like your problem is kind of exponential since you have such an exodus of folks, of then the people left that you want to try to attract to farming.
Well, we have, I think, several programs that are very, very good in helping farmers to just start their own business, and especially through the university, the extension service. That's just based out of this Land Trust University on the West Coast, and they have offices all around the island, as well NRCS, the National Resource Conservation Service. They have a lot of different offices and programs with incentives for farmers to get equipment, to get access to land, to get trainings on how to grow certain type of crops, and even for climate change adaptation. So I don't think there's a lack of these programs, but it's also sometimes it's very difficult for farmers to go through the process of applying for this financing options, since it's like the process can be very hard.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of talked about that, all the skills that are required of a farmer, and then, there are tons of resources out there, federally or locally, but sometimes that bureaucracy or that kind of administrative work can be a little overwhelming.
What are some of the things, like if you guys were to take us to a farmer's market in Puerto Rico, what kind of things would we expect to see, or what are the things that Puerto Rico showcases as this is grown locally?
Well, probably lots of plátanos, which is
Cooking bananas, we love those.
Cooking bananas. You see lots of fruits, lots of soursop.
Papaya. It's quite very similar, to what we see here. A lot of mangoes, a lot of breadfruit.
You see tons of eggplant and kimbombo.
Yeah, it's like okra.
Okra.
But we're
what did you call it?
Kimbombo.
Kimbombo.
Kimbombo. It's the
I like
Spanish
that
for
word
okra.
better.
Oh, okay.
I heard king boom boom. I like that.
Similar, yeah, it's just there.
We'll just stick with that.
Yeah, but a lot of root vegetables as well. Like here, the taro is like we eat it all the time. It's one of our staple crops. And,
cool.
Pumpkins. And it's funny because our diet is rice and beans, and we don't grow them.
Interesting.
But there's a lot of similarities in terms of what grows here and what grows in Hawaii, because we're both kind of tropical in that sense. But another issue that we have is that we want to grow food, but since the island is now 60% reforested, where are we going to grow that? And there's this debate, ecological debate, of where to
so we
grow
go
it.
deforest, kind of like what you were talking before about your studies with palm oil.
Right.
I mean, similar kind of thing, like that balance between agriculture, and now if you have an area that's being reforested, imagine, that debate is pretty hot.
Yeah.
Exactly, because once the forest is back, there's a lot more attention on it, there's a lot more incentive to keep it. Because even if it's like a secondary forest, and it may have, sort of a low, kind of ecological value at the time, there's the potential that in 10, 20 years, that could be, like a mature forest, with a closed-in canopy, and then, you start to get some of sort of the later successional species showing up.
Right. Yeah, if you have certain like endangered or threatened species starting to inhabit that area, then that'll make it even that much more difficult to come back and say, hey, this used to be an agriculture, let's get it back in there.
Correct. So we're now discussing on what are the options. We are a tropical island with a very good climate. People are starting to be interested in agriculture, but where do we grow it? I don't know if you have the same issue, just like where are the best areas to plant the food that we're gonna eat in the next decades?
Yeah, I think we've been talking about that in terms of additional development of where the food's going to be and where the people are. That's kind of one issue. We're going to take another quick 1 minute break and come back to our last segment.
Cool.
Aloha. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the Think Tech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to Think Tech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the Think Tech Hawaii broadcast network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
Aloha and welcome back to the Hawaii Farmer Series. I am your co-host, Justine Espiritu. I have my co-host, Matthew Johnson, next to me, and we have two special guests, Isabel and Paul, joining us visiting from Puerto Rico. So we're kind of talking about comparing the islands and about Isabel's project. And I want to jump back to that and get a little bit more detail. So we were talking, kind of asking about specialty crops or what you see a lot. And I did notice, so you guys have 4 videos that you're making that you're kind of focusing on and then distributing. And I noticed they're livestock, coffee, what were the other
Plantain
things?
production, and fruits and veggies.
Okay, and then so how were those topics kind of selected that you guys decided to focus on and feature?
This project is called Adapte, and it's basically our effort to try to develop and communicate adaptation practices to farmers and forest managers. And we started meeting with our stakeholders since last year, asking them, like, what are the main obstacles to climate change adaptation, or what tools do you need to make better decisions or to manage the land in a sustainable way? And during the discussions, we found that many of the examples of what can they do, they're not local. So we needed kind of to do a research about what adaptation practices can farmers in the Caribbean use to be more resilient to climate change. So we did this vulnerability assessment that is kind of a big study focused on the different agricultural sectors in the island to see what are the challenges in terms of climate change effects on that industry, on that crop, and identify several strategies that farmers can use to be more resilient. So in that sense, we designed this series of 4 videos with fact sheets and more information. And the videos are based on a specific sector. The first one is dairy farming, since dairy farming is the most important economic agricultural business in the island. And last year it suffered a major crisis due to the prolonged drought. So farmers were losing cattle every day. And
So it's like loss of grass for
correct. We had
dairy
the
cows.
drought caused that there's no pastures. So if the cow doesn't eat, the cow doesn't give milk, right? And the cows were super hot because in Puerto Rico it's a very hot climate, right? But the type of cows, the cow breeds that we use come from temperate climates. So that's the first issue that we identified. Farmers can use different breeds that are more heat tolerant, and like the bold cow or the Senepol are like kind of breeds that are more tolerant to changes in climate and to heat stress. And we kind of interview a farmer that is doing all this fascinating innovation in his farms using a different cattle breed, like instead of the normal rule that all the farmers use Holstein breeds, and that's the one that doesn't like very hot weather. So this farmer is not only using a different breed, but it's also using like solar panels to run his production system, and most importantly, he's cultivating the forage that he gives the cows to eat. Because in Puerto Rico, the main problem for the dairy industry is that all the ranchers, they import the food. So the cost of importing concentrated food is so high that they go bankrupt immediately.
Right.
So this farmer is growing his own forage to feed the cow, and it's proven to be a fantastic way of being sustainable. So on the video, he's showing what different types of forage he's growing and how the new breed that he's using is proving to be very effective for his farm business. So that's just one example.
And that's a lot. I mean, obviously the same issues here with any of the cattle industries here in Hawaii, where it's so bad that they'll actually ship over some of the cattle to the mainland for finishing and then have it slaughtered there. I imagine that may be happening in Puerto Rico as well, where they're literally shipped off the island where feed is cheaper than shipping it in.
Yeah.
I'm curious though to see, like, because obviously growing their own forage, like, do you know what kind of things are being grown that seem to be working in the Puerto Rico climate?
This farmer is using maralfalfa, sorghum, soy, brachiaria. There are different pastures, but they're very nutritious. And so he's developed like this very interesting system where he's kind of rotating the pastures and growing to have kind of the tillage. So he has forage during the drought. So he can store a lot more food for those times that he cannot have the cows just grass feeding as they normally do because there's no pastures. So I think maralfalfa, sorghum, soy, and brachiaria are like the star forages now that are working in a very dry areas where he has his farm in the southwest of Puerto Rico.
So then are those kind of examples then, you know, the breed of cattle and then these forages, is that kind of the information then you feature on the video and in these sheets so that you hope, or the idea is that other farmers adopt that?
Correct, because there's a lot of resistance also for farmers to adopt new strategies.
Well, that's what I was curious about.
Yes.
You know, how do you like sell that to them? But I guess when it comes, or how do you guys sell it?
Well, we just kind of selected
I'll let you tell the story.
Yeah. It was kind of easy in the sense that we selected kind of a star farmer. He's doing great. His business is doing great. And that's a perfect example that will motivate other farmers to kind of try different techniques. Because in terms of, he's making very good, his business is solid compared to the other businesses. And not only that, but he has a very high milk production per cow per day.
Wow.
And that's kind of how they measure their the efficiency of the cows. So it's very encouraging, and it's kind of motivating other farmers to be more risky in just trying to try different techniques.
So with that example and the examples that you gave, like the variety of cow and also the forage, I mean, it seems like relatively straightforward, makes sense. Like these are techniques that any farm rancher should be using. Are people having a good response to that? Are people seeing this video and trying it out, or is there even resistance at that level as well?
Well, we're still not sure how this is gonna all play because we just launched the first video December 15, so less than a month ago. But during various stakeholder meetings, we presented the video, just like the first rough cut of the video, and people were super excited, not only to see that you can be a successful dairy farmer in Puerto Rico using just local resources and farm planning, and people were very excited, and they were demanding, now I want examples for the coffee industry, and I want examples for how to grow plantains, and this is gonna be our second video, just this fantastic young farmer that is trying out different cover crops as a way of making the soil more fertile. He doesn't have to use pesticides because these different cover crops helps the plantains be strong and resistant to pests, and the cover crops help to storage water and to fix nitrogen. So he's having one of the best looking plantains over there, just growing organically too. So that's another of the examples that we're working on.
Well, I think that's a good example, kind of the one you just described in terms of being good for the soil and having these plantains look good, and that he's able to kind of transition away from pesticides.
Correct.
I feel like sometimes some people find value of that in and of itself, but you have to really show folks that are doing those things, and they have some economic examples of
Yes.
how that's benefiting them.
Correct.
Because folks don't necessarily want to change their practice just because it's better for soil conservation.
Correct. Yeah, in this case, the farmer is showing that he doesn't have to invest a lot, like in input cost for pesticide or herbicides or fertilizers, because he's also using green manure and organic composting from the same cover crops he's using. So it's kind of a very sustainable circle. So he's showing that he doesn't need to buy pesticides anymore, so that lowers the cost of production, and he's getting more benefits from using the different cover crops under the plantains. So it's proven to be very effective economically.
I guess there's also programs too within USDA, like you mentioned before, NRCS. So
Correct.
there's programs to provide monetary incentives for them to start using these new practices.
Correct. And this farmer, his name is Duamed Colon. He has an agribusiness called Agrotropical, and only because he received help from NRCS through different grants and proposals that he got, he was able to implement these new practices and new technologies. And it's a very good example of collaborative work between federal agencies and farmers and just kind of scientists. That's kind of our part, like working together to identify what practices are good and kind of supporting the farmers to get this grants and help from other USDA agencies.
Anyone from USDA is going to be excited to hear this promotion of the
Yeah,
programs, but it's great because that's the whole purpose of those programs, and it's nice to see how you're tying it into what you're doing and doing with climate adaptation and getting farmers back on the land. So that's fantastic.
We're trying. Yeah.
That's cool. So you have one video done for how long will this project be?
I think we're gonna shoot one more video now in January. This is gonna be the last one. It's gonna be focused on coffee production. And yes, we just plan to have the videos ready before June this year and start a very strong media campaign to just kind of promote the videos. And we're receiving a lot of feedback from agronomists, from researchers, from other farmers, and it's just the start, but
Yeah.
I think it's going to be exciting.
That's so awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on. I'm so glad I was able to lock you in and come talk about it because I'm
Pull you out from your vacation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool to just
Reluctantly so, yes.
yeah, it's great to hear kind of comparing and then just get the details of that project. So thank you guys so much for coming on.
Yeah.
Great.
It's a pleasure, yeah.
That's fun.
So we'll see you next week and every Thursday. Thanks again, Think Tech.